Hello, aspirants, and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into the massive shifts happening in the global order and what they mean directly for India. We're going to untangle this complex web of geopolitics, from U.S. sanctions on Russia to the intense rivalry between America and China, and figure out what this new G2 world means for India's strategy and our economic future.
So, here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the looming threat of sanctions, then zoom out to understand this G2 world. After that, we'll break down the recent US-China deal and then really focus on the new trade challenges this creates for India. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways you absolutely need for your exams.
All right, let's kick things off with the most immediate problem on the table: sanctions. You see, a policy decision made thousands of miles away in Washington is having a direct and pretty serious impact on India's energy security, especially for our oil refineries. Let's get into how.
And let me be clear, this is not a hypothetical question. For a good part of the last year, Russian oil made up more than a third, over 35% of all of India's oil imports. So, when the US decides to sanction a Russian energy giant like Rosneft, well, the shockwaves hit Indian refiners hard and fast.
Now, to really understand what's happening, you need to get this key term, secondary sanctions. These are different. See, a primary sanction is simple, but secondary sanctions have a global reach. The US is essentially telling the rest of the world, hey, if you decide to do business with our target, then you can forget about doing business with us.
The real kicker here is the target. A primary sanction on, say, Rosneft just stops American companies from dealing with them. But a secondary sanction? That threatens any Indian company dealing with Rosneft with being completely cut off from the entire US financial system. For a global player like India, that is a massive threat.
And this isn't just theory, it's happening right now. India's corporate giants are already moving. Indian Oil Corporation has said it will comply. Reliance is expected to slash its Russian crude imports, and HMEL has already stopped buying Moscow's oil completely. Just the threat of these sanctions is enough to change behavior on a massive scale.
Okay, for your exams, here's a simple way to lock this in. Just remember the word fate. F for foreign entities are the target, A for access to US markets gets denied, T for third-party engagement is what's limited, and E for its extraterritorial application. Fate. It perfectly sums up this powerful geopolitical weapon.
Now let's zoom out. Let's look at the bigger picture. These sanctions, they aren't happening in a vacuum. They are a symptom of a much larger dynamic, a world that is increasingly being shaped by the intense competition between the United States and China, creating what many are now calling a G2 world.
And you know, this G2 term isn't just some academic theory. It was actually used by a US president himself to describe the relationship. That signals a fundamental shift, a new era of bipolarity where Washington and Beijing are the two great poles influencing everything that happens on the world stage.
China's leverage in this new G2 world is huge, and it's not just about military strength. It's their near-total control over rare earth minerals, their role as the world's factory, their rapid advances in technology, and their position at the heart of global trade. That combination gives them incredible influence.
And for India, this G2 world presents a direct and growing challenge. China is our #1 strategic rival. We see their aggression on our borders. We're dealing with a massive trade deficit of over $100 billion. And of course, there's the constant strategic headache of the China-Pakistan nexus.
Which brings us to a pivotal event, the temporary truce that the two G2 powers reached in Busan. Now, this is not peace, not by a long shot. It's more like a pause in their trade war. But the terms of this deal have enormous consequences for everyone else, including India.
The deal was basically a strategic trade-off. The US lowered its tariffs on Chinese goods from 57% down to 47%. In exchange, China started buying American farm products again. And, this is the big one, agreed to pause its threats to cut off exports of rare earths for 1 year. It's a very fragile truce.
So let's talk about rare earths for a second. You hear the term a lot. Think of them as the essential vitamins for all of our modern technology. And because China controls most of the world's supply, it gives them a powerful strategic weapon they can use in any negotiation.
And you really can't overstate their importance. We're talking about everything from military hardware like missiles and fighter jets to industrial goods like cars to the smartphone in your pocket. Rare earths are in almost everything, and that's why China's threat to cut them off sent panic through global supply chains.
So this truce between the two biggest economies, it created major ripple effects. And for India's economy, those ripples turned into a real problem. As the US and China dialed down their fight, India suddenly found itself in a tough spot. Let me show you what I mean.
This chart tells the whole story. It's a stark reality. Before this deal, both India and China were facing similar high tariffs from the US. But after the truce, China's tariff rate dropped to 47%, while India stayed up at 50%. Overnight, we were put at a direct trade disadvantage against our main rival.
And the consequences? They were immediate and they were severe. As this new tariff reality set in, India's exports to the United States just plummeted. They fell by 37% in just a few months, all while China's exports to the US were actually growing. Our goods became more expensive, less competitive, almost in a flash.
So what's the path forward? Well, experts like Professor Arpita Mukherjee say we need to be ambitious. To really compete with China, and even other players like Vietnam, India needs to negotiate its own trade deal with the US, aiming for a tariff rate somewhere around 15%. That would be a game changer.
All right, let's bring this all together for your exam preparation. We've gone through a lot, so this is where we synthesize everything into a clear, final briefing. Pay close attention to this.
First, the core concepts. You absolutely have to be able to define these. Secondary sanctions, remember their global reach. G2, the new bipolar world order. Rare earths, China's key strategic lever. And China plus one. That's the global strategy of diversifying supply chains away from China, which is the whole backdrop to this trade drama.
Next, the numbers you have to have at your fingertips. India's tariff rate at 50% versus China's 47%. The painful 37% drop in our exports, that massive $100 billion plus trade deficit with China, and the fact that over 35% of our oil came from Russia before the sanctions hit. These facts are your evidence.
And finally, the big picture strategy for India. The challenge is clear. We have to navigate this unstable G2 world while at a tariff disadvantage. The opportunity is to push for our own game-changing trade deal with the US. And the imperative, the absolute must-do, is to back up our diplomatic moves by building up our own domestic capacity in defense, economy, and technology.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. As the world reorganizes around these two giants, what new forms of diplomatic and economic leverage must India build to not just survive, but to thrive? For more detailed analyses like this, please do check out the other videos on our channel. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.